if anyone would be able to show up. Although it's a virtual webinar, I know a lot of schools were closed up here and some of my friends got up to 40 inches of snow. So hopefully sound is good for you. If you'd like to let us know in the chat window, you can usually find the chat window at the bottom. I'll introduce our panelists tonight. My name is Jennifer Fee and I'm the K-12 program manager at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. And I'm joined by Katie and Susan tonight. You guys want to introduce yourselves?
Sure. Hi, I'm Katie Hessen. I'm from Twin Cities PBS. I'm the science producer for a show called SciGirls.
And I'm Susan Licker. I'm with the Cornell Lab of Ornithology as well, and I can help with any tech issues, and we'll be monitoring your guys' chat tonight.
Great, thank you so much. And speaking of chat, at the bottom of your screen, or generally that's where it shows up for me, you might have a more button or a chat button, and encourage you to use that chat. It's going to be a lot more fun, I think, if we share resources and ideas and some chat there. And be sure in the drop-down menu that you're set to send to all panelists and attendees. Unless you're trying to send a private message or just message us panelists, we're hoping that most people will set that to all panelists and attendees so that everybody can be involved in the chat. All right, so let's practice that chat, shall we? I would love for you to share where you're from. And if you got snow today, let us know how much. And then also, just quickly, why is it personally important to you to engage girls in STEM? Katie, I can't believe you're in Minnesota and you have no snow given what's happening here.
We had snow earlier. We had a warm spell and it all melted, and I can see grass in my yard. It's weird.
And Susan, just to confirm that we're recording.
Yes, we are.
Thank you. Great, well, feel free to share your ideas in the chat. Thanks, Paige. Bright and sunny. See, I don't know why I'm so Ithaca-centric, I suppose. I think everybody's covered in snow right now, given all of my friends are posting snow pictures on their Facebook pages and such. Well, I'll let those continue to roll in so that we can get to know each other a little bit and head on into the plan for the day. Again, Susan and I are from the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, and our mission at the lab is to interpret and conserve the Earth's biological diversity through research, education, and citizen science focused on birds. So we have a three-part mission, and most of our K-12 training and development, resource development, falls within those categories and is nature inspired. And one of the things I would like for us to do today is think about how all of our programs and such are related to the SciGirls Strategies that Katie's about to share. So we'll review those strategies for engaging kids in STEM. We'll connect those strategies to the things that are important at Cornell, the citizen science and inquiry. I'd love for you to consider what you're already doing and what you want to start doing as a result of this webinar, and maybe any new understandings or learnings you have about engaging girls in STEM. And of course, we're going to introduce some resources. And I encourage you not to get too frantic about writing down those resources, because Susan's compiled the things that we discussed tonight into a PDF that you'll get after the webinar. And also, we'll probably add anything that comes out of the discussion, any resources into that document, such that everybody will have access to them. So I'd like to encourage you to start a little list, make this a little bit more interactive. And what I ask you to do is take a piece of paper, and on one side of the paper, write things I'm doing, and on the other side, things I could do. So, or things I could try. And as you think about your own practice, I'm sure many of us are already doing some great things, and hopefully maybe we'll get some ideas today of things that we could try to make our practice even just that much better. So again, if you don't mind to start that list now, and then just throughout the presentation, do a running list, see how many you can get in each. And we'll call this out a little bit later as well and use it later. So just real quick, and I'm not going to go into this data very well, except to say that, you know, this has been something of concern to NSF, the National Science Foundation, the US government, other governments worldwide, corporations, of how do we best diversify STEM, especially involving more girls in STEM. And one of the things we know is that girls don't differ in their abilities to do STEM. The problem lies in a decrease in interest in STEM as time goes on. And a lot of that interest drop off happens in about middle school. In some fields, it's not so bad, like biosciences and social sciences are about 50% young women in the field as an undergraduate. But the harder scientists, such as engineering and computer science, math, statistics, physics, are sorely underrepresented with girls getting their degrees in those fields. And the same bears out also in occupations. Life sciences, not bad, but other physical sciences, computer science, engineering, those see much, much fewer instances of girls in STEM. So again, it's not that girls can't do STEM, it's basically that they're choosing not to, or they're losing interest in it. And a lot of the research that I've been looking at recently show that a lack of representation, especially in those fields that I mentioned of being underrepresented, is not helping the problem. If you don't see women represented in, for example, the field of computer science and engineering, you don't feel welcome into that field, or maybe you just don't see yourself as selecting that career path. Do you have anything to add to that, Katie? Okay. So there you go, the summary. And again, to hone in on that last point, that while they don't differ in ability, that it could be related to negative self-perception and stereotypes in those fields. And I found this interesting when I was kind of digging into the literature about this and the thinking about, well, why does it matter? And some of you shared earlier in the chat, like, why does it matter to you personally to engage girls in STEM? I found this quote that I found interesting in a study that had been funded by Microsoft. And Microsoft was concerned because so few of its employees, its computer science employees and its engineers, are women. And I like this quote about a diverse and inclusive workforce will yield better products and solutions for our customer and better experiences for our employees. And when we encourage girls to pursue science and technology, we double our potential to solve problems. So that there's an inherent value in having diversity in our colleges, in our careers later in life. And I'm going to go ahead and turn the floor over to Katie. She's going to share a series of really exciting recent SciGirls strategies. And again, as she's talking, keep running that list of the things that maybe you do well already that she mentions, and the things that maybe you could try out in the future.
All right, thanks, Jen. Can you guys hear me okay? Perfect. Yeah, okay. So if you're not familiar with SciGirls, I'm just going to talk really quickly about what it is, and then we'll kind of jump into the research and what we learned from it. So SciGirls is first and foremost a TV show on PBS. So we're kind of a non-typical audience for PBS, and that our main audience is kind of middle school youth, as opposed to the Daniel Tiger crowd or Sesame Street crowd, really young kids. So we're a TV show that has done a bunch of episodes centered on citizen science, which is kind of how we have this connection here. But we have a big online presence too. We've got a bunch of video games and some stuff on the PBS Kids app and the video app. And then we also have a lot of stuff for educators. So we do professional development on increasing gender equity in STEM. We also have lots and lots of activities that are available to everybody, anyone who wants them, on our website. Susan just put one of our websites up in the chat. So that's what SciGirls is. If you're not familiar, we're a TV show and kind of all kinds of associated outreach things to go along with it. But one of the things that SciGirls is really known for in the education community is these research-based best practices for engaging girls in STEM. So Jen, if you want to turn to the next slide. What happened about, gosh, I don't know, 10 years ago, we got a big National Science Foundation grant to kind of look at research and come up with a set of strategies for engaging girls in STEM. And that was called the SciGirls 7. It was awesome. A lot of people used it. We got a lot of really good feedback and a lot of other NSF grants from that. And then about 2 years ago, we said, you know, this is going really well, but there's a lot of new research that has come out. So we're going to relook at all the literature, all the new stuff in particular, and see if anything has changed that we're missing. So that's what I'm going to be talking about today, is kind of our newly updated set of SciGirls strategies. I'm going to go through them really quickly so that we have lots of time to talk about citizen science and kind of discuss things afterwards. But if you're looking for more information, you can download this big booklet on the website right there, scigirlsconnect.org. And there's a lot of examples, and all the text from my slides actually comes directly from this. So before I dig into the SciGirls strategies, the first thing I want to say is that the research that we use is all based on girls. So I'm going to use the term girl, but the SciGirls strategies are really beneficial to every student, not just girls, not just boys, you know, any sort of gender identity, anything. And it's just important to remember that this is not bad for boys, it's good for boys too. Okay, next slide. Okay, so the SciGirls strategies has kind of these two overarching ideas that I'm just going to talk about quickly. And the first one is STEM for all learning environment. You can go to the next slide. And STEM for all learning environment is just this big idea of creating an environment where students feel welcome. So this could be about how the space is decorated, what the chairs are like. Do you have accommodations for everyone that needs them? Do you have posters up that represent what your students look like, you know, as far as people in careers and things like that, or is everything a poster of Albert Einstein? But it's also more than just the physical space, it's how people feel in that space. So how welcome do people feel? Have you used icebreakers? Do kids know each other's names? Do they feel like they are respected and they are able to talk if they want to? So this is STEM for all learning environment. It's kind of a big overarching idea. Next slide, Jen. And the next one's even bigger, I think, and this is culturally responsive teaching. And we could sit through, you know, tons and tons of classes and get degrees in this and still not have like really fully become a culturally responsive teacher. This definition here is from Geneva Gay, and she's talking about how being a culturally responsive teacher is a lifelong process. This is not something that like you can listen to a webinar and just say, now I've done it and I check all the boxes. So just keep that in mind, that this is an ongoing thing. And this is the idea of making sure that you're keeping the culture of your students or your audience in mind in everything that you do. And go ahead, next slide, Jen. And I want to challenge everybody to really think about what I mean by the term culture. And that we often think about culture as a person's religion, the color of their skin, or maybe like the language they speak. But so we like to use this cultural iceberg and think about how those things are really just the tip of the iceberg. And there's so much other non-observable parts of your culture that can really influence how you feel in a learning space. And so that can be things like social etiquette, ideas of personal space, or ideas of gender roles, all kinds of concepts, ways that you communicate, personal bubbles, things like that. So these are all other types of culture that you might not really think about, but really do have a big effect on how an educator is interacting with a student or a learner. Okay, next slide. So these two ideas of STEM for all learning environment and culturally responsive teaching are kind of overarching over the 6 strategies that I'm going to talk about now. And these 6 strategies, if you're doing all these things, they're helping you create a STEM for all learning environment and be a culturally responsive teacher. So we'll dive into the 6 now. The first one is about connecting STEM experiences to the lives of your learners. And this can be as simple as asking them how it connects to their life. You know, if you are talking about a bird survey and asking them, what birds do you see? This is connecting to their life. But it can also be about giving students time to reflect, not just asking them what it is, but giving them a lot of time to think about something, or giving them the ability to have choice in what their project is, so they can choose what area they want to do. Now, you can't always do that, right? But giving some sort of choice can be really important for allowing students to connect things to their life. But it's also part of this, like talking about decorating a space or showing examples of things that might connect with the youth in your group. So this could be posters, materials, examples, things like that, that mirror what the people look like that are in your program. Okay, next slide. So number 2 is about supporting girls using STEM practices. STEM practices this is like the science and engineering practices that you would see in the national standards. So this is asking questions, identifying problems, planning, predicting, building, testing, prototypes, all of these kinds of things. And what the research really said is that more than just a hands-on activity, we want it to be an activity where youth are really doing something that a scientist might do. And citizen science is like the perfect way to do that, right? It's not just busy work. They're actually helping the cause and, you know, collecting data that someone is going to use, and that gives a real sense of purpose for a project that people are doing. So that's part of using STEM practices and using real tools that STEM professionals would use. Okay, next slide. So this is about empowering girls to embrace struggle. And I think this can be a really hard one for educators to do. And this is the idea that when your youth struggle, you don't step in right away and fix the problem. You help them work through the struggle and develop their own way to deal with the problem, and to make sure that they feel safe, they're not going to get made fun of, that they know that struggling is real, and that this is a part of the process, and professionals struggle too. Everything isn't easy, and that's okay. And a big part of that, or a way that you can do that, is that in making sure that whatever activity you're doing, that everything isn't a race. You're not only praising the people that finish or win. So when you're giving feedback, you're not just saying, great job, you know, awesome, you made it to level 10, but instead you're commenting on the things that they have control over. So this is that last bullet there, providing specific feedback on things that the kids can control, such as the process they use, their strategy, how they work together as a team, things like that. So like, I really like the way that you sat down and drew out what your plan was. Even though it didn't work, your way of planning was so fantastic. So that's embracing struggle. It's a hard one. You can do it. Okay, next slide. So challenging stereotypes is another one that we really find in the research that this is a really important thing, is to encourage your youth to challenge stereotypes. And we get a lot of feedback from educators who are like, but what if I'm telling my kids about a stereotype that they didn't know existed? And really what the research says is that what you're doing, even if they don't know this stereotype exists, you're kind of helping them in the future. When they encounter it, they won't think that it's only them. Okay, it's part of the struggle problem too. Like, you're not the only person that this has happened to. Other people have made this wrong assumption. It's not just you. And so some of this ways you can challenge stereotypes are, of course, by introducing role models, which we'll talk about later. So inviting other people that reflect the way that your students look and the values that your student have. So if you have a whole bunch of girls, you need to have role models that are girls. If you have a lot of African American students, you should have role models that are African Americans, and like, you know, the list goes on and on. It's this idea that if they can see someone else as a computer scientist or a physicist or whatever, someone that looks like them that is a physicist, it shows them that maybe this is a thing that they can do. But it's also really important to make sure that common stereotypes, like the computer science is the easiest one to talk about, like this idea that all computer scientists are white men that are sitting in a windowless room working by themselves. And then you show them pictures or videos of like, here are computer scientists, and it's men and women, and they're working together in an open space, and they're working together on projects, and like this is what they actually do. So challenge those stereotypes as often as you can and call it out as a stereotype, and you'll help build your students up as they're growing older. Next slide. So this idea of STEM fields being collaborative, social, and community oriented, we find is really important for youth, especially middle school girls. Um, and that allowing them an opportunity to work together and collaborate and work on teams where they feel like an equal partner in their team is really important for building STEM identity and building confidence in becoming a STEM person. And part of this ties in with stereotypes, right? If you're showing them that you can do this science or this tech field and work with people and have friends that you work with, and you're not alone in a room, you're breaking those stereotypes, but also showing them that like, oh, this is a career actually that I would like going to work if I'm working with people and I feel like I'm helping my community, right? That's a big part of it too, is that, we think that a lot of why the biology and medical fields, like doctors and nurses and things, why there's so many women represented there is because those are helper fields. And so if you can show that engineers and physicists and computer scientists are also helpers and they help their community in other ways, that could help increase students wanting to go into fields like that, so they feel like they can be a part of their community and give back to the community. Next slide. So number 6 is about STEM role models. I mentioned this a little bit, but what's really important is to make sure that you have diverse role models and mentors that reflect what the youth look like in your program, and also that they are people that are comfortable talking to youth. Doesn't mean that they're not nervous, but it means that they've been prepared a little bit and are going to be a positive role model, not someone who perpetuates stereotypes or puts the students down or makes them feel like this is something they can't do. And SciGirls actually has a lot of resources to help with that. We have a whole guide that's called Role Model Strategies that is just for role models to help them kind of figure out what they should say when they're interacting with youth and what are the good things and the bad things to do. But introducing youth to role models is so important for breaking stereotypes and kind of showing students that like, oh, this is a thing that I could do. And I think one of the really important things about introducing role models is that it introduces to students the idea that this is a person and not a career. So one of the number one things that we always tell role models when they're meeting with groups of youth is make sure you show pictures of your family, talk about your pets, pictures of you canoeing or rock climbing or whatever it is that you do, so that youth see you as a person, not just a college degree and a career. So it's really important if they want to see themselves in a career like you have, they have to also be like, oh, well, I can be a mom and be a physicist, or I can still travel the world and be a computer scientist, or all of these things. I really like to cook, and so I can do that and have this career. They don't have to be separate things. My life can incorporate all of these. And this is something that we hear from educators, that it's hard to do because it takes a lot of work to find good role models, and also to get them to come into your class, so or your whatever your program is. And so we have resources to help with that. And one way is videos. If you can't get people to come in person, or in particular, if you can't find someone with a specific interest or a part of their background or their life that you want to share with your youth, you could try showing them a video. So SciGirls produces a bunch of 3 to 5 minute role model videos. There's lots of other companies out there that do it too, like Microsoft has a bunch. And the If Then Collective from the National Girls Collaborative Project, they also have a bunch of videos that are short. They highlight women, they talk about their life and their career, and that can be a good engaging way to get students to kind of break those barriers in their head about stereotypes about what what STEM careers look like. And then the next, go ahead, you can turn the next slide, Jen. The next option is to use the Femmes website. And so this is if you are looking for a real live person to come to your program, or to like Skype in or have a Zoom meeting with your kids, you can go look at the Femmes website, and it's a searchable database. Likewise, if you know any scientists that are women that are interested in volunteering at programs, you should encourage them to make a profile on Femmes. There's a simple background check that happens for women that go on here, but what it is any educators or girls who are looking for a role model, so maybe it's someone who's trying to do a research project at school, or a Girl Scout who's working on her Gold Award and she needs to find someone to work with, they can search and find someone based on geographic area or languages spoken or careers or all kinds of things like that. So Femmes is a really good way to search for role models. Okay, do I have one more slide? No. So that was a really quick overview of the SciGirls strategies. We'll have more time for questions and stuff at the end, but I think we want to jump right in. I'll let Jen take over so she can talk about how the SciGirls strategies and gender equity tie into citizen science.
Thank you so much, Katie. And just a quick reminder to think about what Katie said and maybe add some things to your lists. And if you have any questions during this presentation, or any questions of Katie about the resources she shared or that research, just feel free to add it in the chat. All right, one of the things that intrigues me about what Katie shared is I see these common themes like the importance of making science real in various ways, of connecting it to mentorship, of challenging stereotypes, of presenting just this real view of science. And I think that's something, if I was to add to my things I do well list at the Lab of Ornithology, it's connecting, especially in those ways of being relevant and real. So what we typically concentrate on at the lab, and again, think of the things that you do, whether they're related to these 3 pillars, as we call them, or not, or maybe they're just the things that you do in your programming, connecting kids to nature, doing citizen science projects and inquiry investigations. There's so much realness in all 3 of those realms. And I'm just going to share some examples of each of those. The first, at the heart of much of what we do, is thinking about connecting kids to nature and the importance of connecting kids to their local place, which I think contributes to the relevancy that Katie shared about. And of course, also has all of these other benefits of, helping kids cognitive ability and mood and socio-emotional learning, and even academic scores have shown to go up, that nature has the benefit of being, I think, well connected to not only the SciGirls strategies, but having these other benefits, health and wellness benefits as well. The second pillar that we do a lot in is citizen science. Probably most of you are familiar with that term, but in case you aren't, it's when people, just the general public, report their observation using basic scientific protocols. And at the lab, of course, most of our projects are bird focused, but we know that these projects can help scientists answer real world questions. So the idea for youth that our data is actually going into database that scientists are using to tell where birds are, where they're going, how their populations are, is just again and again, I've been told by teachers and students alike that it's so motivating for them to collect the data, and that they really appreciate that real world connection. I think especially at middle school, when the STEM drop off for girls is really starting to happen, middle schoolers and high schoolers like, why do we have to do this? Well, the data is real and it's relevant, and that's incredibly motivating. Now, of course, if you're not terribly into birds, or maybe are interested in engaging your students or the youth you work with in other ways, there are a suite of citizen science projects out there. I recommend looking at SciStarter and finding one that works for you. But pretty much, if there's something you're interested in, there is a citizen science project that you can use. And all of these projects have this thing in common, where the data, your counts, your experience, or the things that you're doing really do matter. And that kind of brings us into the third pillar, which is while you're outside observing nature, for example, while you're doing citizen science counts, whether it's on birds or butterflies or ants or whatever, you start to notice patterns. And so many teachers have said a quote akin to this quote from my friend Phil: "I learned that taking them outside and letting them do bird observation was a great way to motivate them to ask questions in science." And I think that feeds into some of what Katie was talking about with the building science practices, right? The asking of questions, collecting data, drawing conclusions, all of those deep practices, well beyond just hands-on experience that we want to engage all students in, but work especially well for girls. And let me give you an example. Maybe you can reflect on your practice in the time that you've done something like this. We routinely send feeders to schools, and the school got one of our hopper feeders. They put it up, they were very excited, and no birds came. And the teacher challenged them, well, why aren't the birds coming? And one of the kids said, well, this area looks pretty sad. Like, it doesn't look welcoming for birds. So the teacher challenged them to come up with and draw habitat improvements that maybe they would suggest. So of course the kids put in water sources and fruit trees and bushes and different kinds of cover and bird houses and all of this stuff to try to make it more welcoming for kids. And she eventually encouraged the kids to write a small grant, get support from the PTA and the administration at the school, and to actually implement some of their habitat improvements. And the kids were just so thrilled to send us their pictures and their drawings and so forth. And I think that this also illustrates the sort of getting outside, doing citizen science, making observations, and you know, asking and answering your own questions, or doing some engineering design here, and all the while being transparent to your kids that they are doing science practices, that what they're doing is the same kinds of things as scientists do, that science, as Katie said, is creative and connected and social and all of those great things that we want. I got this email from my friend Jody about 1.5 years ago or so. She is a 3rd and 4th grade teacher, but she's started this bird club that includes the younger students. And she does, at the beginning of her school year, the classic Draw a Scientist test. If you're not familiar with it, without a lot of prompting at the beginning of a program, you say to the kids, can you just draw a scientist for me? And what comes up is Einstein, right? Men with crazy hair and beakers. But what our hope is as science educators is to have the kids look more representative, or draw scientists that are more representative of real science. And so what Jody shared is, for the first time ever, she's seen this massive shift thanks to kids doing citizen science, going outside, being part of this bird club, you know, doing the counts, and her all the while talking about and making transparent that what they're doing is real science. So 98% of her girls that year drew a girl scientist. A few kids of color drew a scientist of color. Half the kids drew their scientist outside, and there's an awesome example there. I don't see any beakers or crazy hair. And this is a guy in jeans that looks like he's having fun and doing cool things. So I really think that these actions can help in doing these suggestions that Katie's made, or maybe drawing from some of the examples that I've shared. So we've got a pretty small group tonight, and instead of going into breakout rooms, what I think we should do is just go ahead and have the discussion here. I believe Susan has the ability to unmute everyone.
Yes, so I'm making it so all of you guys are allowed to talk right now, and it does come up just as you're muted, but you can unmute yourself, and yeah, we will have a discussion. Unfortunately, we won't be able to see each other on video, just the panelists are able to do that, but hopefully that doesn't keep you guys from sharing about these questions that we're going to talk about.
And of course, if you're in a location that you can't use your audio right now and you want to just share in the chat window, you're welcome to do that. So the things that we're hoping that we can hear are just, you know, maybe in the next 5 to 10 minutes is, what are you doing now that you think is working well? I mean, maybe you've had an experience like Jody has, where you've tried something, you saw some impacts. And then if there's anything that you feel like you need help with, maybe Katie or one of the other members of our webinar can help. And again, if you don't want to share verbally, you can share in the chat as well. Would anybody like to unmute and share? Maybe Susie, I think you just unmuted.
I'm Susie from Peoria. I guess I talk a lot. A couple of the things I wrote down that I see that I'm doing well. I work at an environmental center with a lot of mostly K through 8 kids. And one thing I think I'm doing well is getting actual tools that ecologists use in their hands and engaging in the scientific method when working with them. I think one of the things that I need help on the most is that in the community I live in, most people in the sciences tend to be white, and a lot of the kids that we serve are kids of color. So one of the things that I want to do is, I do think that we are finding ways to show them good role models that are women in the sciences. Not a very good job of showing them a diversity of skin color in the sciences. So I wrote down Femme, and maybe that's something I will try to kind of reach beyond my immediate community so that these kids can see scientists who look like them. I think that's really important.
Yeah, I encourage you to. I don't know where you are, but sometimes it's not. When we ask, when SciGirls goes out and we are in a community, like we're going to film a show or we're doing an outreach program and we're trying to find role models that show a good diversity of people, people tend to want to be like, here's the person that's the head of our lab and has been here the longest and has the biggest name. And just remember that it doesn't have to be that person. It can be a lab tech. They are still a scientist. They're still doing science. It can be anyone that works there. And I think it's also important if you have a local college that you could also look for college students, contact some professors, like if this is a thing you're really trying to do, and you could even get a professor to come and bring some of their students who are maybe, seniors in college that are people of color that represent the youth in your group, that's often a pretty good resource too, that it doesn't need to be someone who is practicing at some big lab.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah.
Anybody else want to share one thing they're doing well or something they need help with, or maybe a reflection on Susie? Beth, did you unmute?
Yes, I'm Beth Hornberger. One thing that I do really well is finding a literature hook that connects somehow to the science that we're doing that week. Something that I need help with is more technology. To get the technology in there so the kids, because the kids are very tech savvy, much more so than I am.
Are the kids allowed to use apps, or do they have Chromebooks or iPads or something like that?
They all have Chromebooks.
We've gotten into trying to help kids use the citizen science apps like Merlin, which is available in a desktop version. The Seek app is amazing. Anybody else have any ideas for incorporating technology and science? And Beth, what grade are you at?
I do before and after school. So I have kindergarten through 6th grade.
Okay.
And I also work with Girl Scouts.
Mm-hmm. Any other ideas for people to share, maybe to support Beth? You can also, again, add to the chat.
I'd like to use iNaturalist, but I don't have like a smartphone.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that that's available anywhere else, like Chromebooks.
Yeah, I know the app that goes along with iNaturalist is called Seek, S-E-E-K, and it is amazing. You can identify anything or many things with it. Like I took it out all spring. I discovered all the weeds in my yard. I identified bugs with it. I found frog in my yard. I identified the frog with it. It was pretty cool. took it to the beach. I found a dead skate on the beach. I identified that. I mean, it's really diverse and cool, but that would require a smartphone, although it's probably tablet based as well, I'm guessing. I don't think they have a desktop version of it.
Yeah, I would encourage you to think about other ways to use technology. Like if this is something that your students want to do, is that if you could do some sort of open-ended project, as open-ended as you're comfortable with, but where you let students do some sort of a final project that's of their choosing. So maybe you guys go out and you're doing some sort of citizen science project, or you're observing something, but then the students get to report back on what they learned or what they saw in their own way. So that could be making a short video or drawing. If they don't want to use any tech, they could draw and paint or write a story or make a simple stop motion animation. There's a lot of different ways that you can tie tech into the kind of like culminating thing that you're doing for a unit, that doesn't necessarily tie to having to use an app or having to specifically record data using something or graphing, although that's kind of a fun, engaging thing to do too. So I don't know if that helps or if that is scary, but
what Susie mentioned, I'm also reflecting on about like giving them tools, that she's good at that. And I don't think the tools have to be tech. They can be all hand lenses if you don't have access to apps.
Mm-hmm. I think even like good measuring tools. I also in my spare time coach high school robotics, and it's one of the things that I'm always amazed at, like how many of the kids haven't seen good like precision measuring tools, and high school kids will just go around measuring things in our metal shop because they've never played with something like that before. And it's like such an amazing thing for me as an educator to see that like they just really love to have a tool, and they know what it's for and they can do things with it. Someone else commented in the chat about trying to be better about not using the term guys.
Yes, I do that. I'm trying to break myself.
It's something we actually really struggle with, especially when we're filming the TV show, which is such a funny thing, but people are very conscious about every word that they use when they know they're being recorded. And so many of us, myself included, say you guys or guys all the time. I'm from the Midwest. Whoever it was in Chicago. And I do it too. And so you just have to think about what is appropriate for your group. You can say, if it's little kids, you can say friends. A bunch of middle school kids aren't going to want to be like, if you're like, hey friends, let's go do this, they will laugh at you. But what are other people's suggestions for a term that you could use for a group of people that is non-gendered?
We should totally add a chat list. I've heard folks, ladies and gentlemen, y'all. Mm-hmm. But I'm sure if we brainstormed in the chat, we'd probably could come up with 10 or 15 different.
Oh, I like it. Somebody says humans. Middle and high schoolers think humans is funny. Yes, I love that. And I'm totally going to use that. Yeah.
Hey, humans.
Mm-hmm.
All right, humans. Well, thank you for sharing, everyone. I do think we all happen to be women given the names, but that's an assumption. Yeah. And thank you for all your sharing. I hope that you'll continue to share in the chat. And we will go ahead and Susan or I, and there's an app that you love, a resource you love, don't hesitate to put it in the chat window. And Katie and I have assembled some of our favorite resources from our programming. So I'll let Katie give a little bit of a kind of final pitch for her things, and then I'll give mine.
Sure. This is the kind of the main SciGirls website where we have all of our educator resources. Excuse me, because we're PBS and we're mostly funded by the National Science Foundation, everything is free and readily available for anyone who wants to use it. All the videos and the activities, everything can be downloaded or streamed. It all has closed captions and everything's available in Spanish and English. So it's all there. You can use anything. You can share it freely and widely. Yeah. I think, did I only have one resource slide? I think I
I
only
think
have
so. And I love all the SciGirls things. It's really transformative. And don't forget about the citizen science season too. It's
yeah. Did I say that we did one season a
You
couple
did in the
years ago that was
beginning.
all about citizen science, but we have funding now from the National Science Foundation again to do another season that's citizen science in the national parks. And so we're actually going to start filming that as soon as we can. When things feel safer that we can film with students, we'll be out in the national parks filming a bunch more content and role model videos and stuff.
Awesome stuff. I'll also put a plug in for our Crossing Boundaries materials. I think SciGirls is sort of that tween, early teen kind of age range, and Crossing Boundaries highlights some undergraduate students, and they have longer videos on these students about their work in the field. So especially at a middle or high school level, I think that Crossing Boundaries has so many great resources. And then also I had mentioned the group of kids that did the habitat improvements. And one of the things we're passionate about at the lab is thinking about involving kids in their own science experiments or scientific investigations. And we do have a free curricula called Investigating Evidence that Susan's probably going to share in the chat if she hasn't already. And that's a free download that will help you turn kids' questions from their observations into legitimate studies and experiments. And I'd love to encourage all of you to join us in April. And I don't know, Susan, if we can send a link to the webinar page so that we can make that happen. But the lab is really doing a lot of work right now in JEDI, Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. And so we're going to go a little bit broader during that webinar and do some pre-readings and discussing articles to help us build our understanding of supporting equity, especially in science and in K-12 education. So we're really excited about that. First time we've tried that approach, and hopefully that you'll join us for that as well. And we will stick around for another minute or two, and happy to take questions in the chat or verbally. You can also reach out to us. I've got our email addresses there, and both of us, of course, have social media presence, so don't hesitate to follow us there or hit us on the social media apps as well. And as we draw into the final slide, which will be time for questions, I always like to do this when I finish any PD, which is just, what's my take home? In the next little bit of time, what do I want to stop doing, start doing, or do a little bit differently? So if there's anything on your list that you're like a nugget that you want to write to yourself, such that when you find that list in a day or two or a week, maybe you'll be encouraged to implement. And with that, I open it up for questions, and really just appreciate your attendance tonight so much, and your attention and working with us through that discussion.
Yes, and everybody still is able to unmute themselves and ask questions verbally if you would like to, or in the chat. Oh, somebody's asking to go back to the slide, the email slide for a minute, Jen.
There we go.
And we will also be sending this out via email after tonight's.
Yep, and I encourage anyone who has questions or wants more resources about gender equity, feel free to send me an email. I spend a significant portion of every day responding to random emails from people, so it's not weird. Don't be embarrassed to send an email and ask a question or ask for a resource, or yeah.
Well, hopefully you got a new bit of information. I know, Katie, thank you so much for presenting tonight. Every time you talk, and I've heard about the SciGirls Strategies probably a dozen times now, I always pick out a new nugget, and it kind of impacts my way of thinking. So I appreciate you being here so much.
Good, thanks for having me. Always happy to share everything we have.
It's really awesome stuff. So I'm so glad you can share it with us. Great. Well, stay safe, everyone. Please, we'll see you at the April webinar. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to Katie and I.